The last thing Lucian Hale said before Boone Shackle put his hand around Esther Marrin's throat was, "There is no reason for this to become public, Mrs. Marrin." He had been saying versions of that sentence for nearly 10 minutes. The paper lay on the Iron Laurel's bar between them. 4 pages, 1 red seal, 1 blank line where he expected her name, and 1 date in the top corner that had made Esther's hands go perfectly still when she first read it. June 12, 1878. The Iron Laurel did not exist until October of 1880. That was the first lie. It was not the largest one. The saloon was open. It was a cold Monday night in Juniper Bend, New Mexico Territory, and 27 men were inside because weather, whiskey, and loneliness made reliable customers. 2 ranch hands sat near the stove. 3 freighters argued over a wagon axle by the front window. A poker game in the back had paused only long enough for 1 player to stack his winnings with 2 careful fingers. Nobody missed what was happening at the bar. Nobody stood. Esther had learned not to expect men to become brave all at once. Hale stood on the customer side with his gloves still on, dressed in a black town coat too fine for dust and too clean for the street outside. Boone Shackle stood half a step behind him, broad enough to block the view of the liquor shelves, with a face that looked as if the world had disappointed him, and he meant to collect payment from anyone smaller. A 3rd man waited at the front door. Esther did not know his name. She did not need to. Men like that were punctuation. Hale tapped the document once. "This releases your obligation," he said. "You sign, you walk away with $200, and you keep your dignity." Esther looked at the red seal. "The county register has no instrument by this number." Something moved behind Hale's eyes. Not fear, not yet, annoyance. Records in this territory are imperfect. The paper names a storage debt incurred 2 years before the building stood. Hale's mouth tightened. "Your late husband signed what he signed." "My late husband was in Kansas on the date shown here." That was when Boone reached across the bar. His hand closed around Esther's throat with the blunt certainty of a man who had done harm before and been paid for it after. The room went silent so quickly that the stove sounded loud. Esther's fingers came up against his wrist, not clawing, not begging, just measuring the pressure and the angle and the strength she did not have. Her eyes stayed on Hale. She had spent 3 years running a saloon in a town that believed widows were temporary owners of things men had not yet taken. She had read every receipt, every tax notice, every freight bill, every county posting nailed to the board outside the post office. She had learned the difference between what a man claimed and what a record could prove. And with Boone Shackle's thumb pressing into the hollow under her jaw, she understood something simple. Hale was not there because the paper was strong. He was there because it was weak. She did not sign. Every man in the Iron Laurel knew that sound before he knew anything else. The first click lifted heads. The second froze them. At the rear door, a man stood in the unlit frame with a Colt in his right hand and no expression worth naming. He had not raised his voice. He had not announced himself. He had not asked Boone to let go. He had only drawn the hammer back and leveled the barrel at the place where Boone's left ear met his skull. The man was tall in the spare, economical way of riders who owned nothing they could not carry. His coat was dark brown wool, worn flat at the cuffs. His hat shadowed most of his face, but Esther saw a saw scar that pulled one corner of his mouth slightly downward, and the streaks of gray near his temples. His holster was tied low, not for display, for use. The stranger at the front door looked once at the gun, once at Hale, and made the only intelligent decision he would make all evening. He left. Boone's hand loosened. Not enough. The revolver did not move. Boone let go. Esther took one breath through a bruised throat. Then she picked up Hale's paper, folded it once, and tore it through the seal. Then she tore it again. She set the 4 pieces on the bar in front of him. "The courthouse opens at 8, she said. Her voice sounded rough. She did not try to soften it. "Bring a document that can survive daylight." Hale looked from the ruined paper to the man with the revolver. For the first time since he had entered, he did not seem certain how the room ended. He left 5 minutes later with Boone behind him. No one stopped them. No one thanked the man at the back door either. That was Juniper Ben's way. Shame made people quiet. The man lowered the hammer, 1 notch at a time, holstered the Colt without looking down, and sat at the empty card table nearest the rear door. He picked up an abandoned deck and began to shuffle. Esther went into her office. She closed the door, and in the dark, with the bruise already rising on her throat, she opened the drawer that held the ledger nobody in town knew existed. The ledger was not the one customers saw behind the bar. That one was clean, plain, and useful. This one was wrapped in oilcloth, bound with a cracked leather strap, and written in 2 hands. The first 43 pages belonged to Eli Marrin, her husband. The rest belonged to Esther. She lit the desk lamp and turned to the page she had marked before sunrise. The claim Lucian Hale had brought to the Iron Laurel was built on a freight lien for $390. Supposedly issued against Eli Marrin on June 12, 1878 for lumber, storage barrels, and opening inventory. But the Iron Laurel's first license was dated October 4, 1880. Its first liquor tax was paid 6 days after that. Its first freight shipment arrived on the 16th, in Esther's handwriting. A man can owe money before he owns a business. He cannot owe money for supplies delivered to a room that has not been built. Esther ran 1 finger down the column. No matching lien number, no county index record, no freight agent signature she recognized, and at the bottom the red seal. A square seal. The county had used an oval seal until 1881. She had seen enough posted notices to know it. Hale's forged debt was dated 1878 and stamped with a seal adopted 3 years later. She stared at that fact until it stopped being a suspicion and became a weapon. 2 knocks came at the office door, measured. Not Ruth Danner from the kitchen, who knocked as if she were trying to wake a dead man. Not Ruth's son, Jesse, who knocked once and spoke through the door before anyone answered. "It's open," Esther said. The man from the rear doorway stepped inside and stopped just past the threshold. He did not look at the ledger first. He looked at the room, the desk. The map of the territory pinned beside the cabinet. The narrow window over Main Street. The other door leading to the storeroom. He counted exits the way Esther counted cash. "You're bleeding," he said. Esther touched her throat. Her fingers came away rust-colored. "Sit down." He considered the chair, then turned it slightly so he could see both doors and the window before he sat. "Rafe Calder, I know." His eyes shifted to her. "A handbill with your name on it was posted outside the assay office last winter," Esther said. "Territorial warrant. Armed obstruction of a federal seizure. The warrant was recalled 5 weeks ago. You read small print." I read everything. For a moment something almost amused moved in his face. It did not reach a smile. "Then you know I'm no deputy. I know you were one. Not anymore. Then tonight you were only a man with a gun. That is usually what men are, before someone gives them a title." Esther studied him. Most men filled silence because they feared what it would reveal. Rafe Calder let silence work. "What do you want?" she asked. "Bed, meals, 7 days. Why 7? I leave after the eastbound mail coach. Boone Shackle knows I'm here until then. Hale knows Boone knows." Esther looked at the map. 7 days. Judge Solomon Kittredge was due on the circuit in 8. If Hale could not force her out before Kittredge arrived, the paper would have to be argued where a judge could see it, and Hale had not built that paper to be seen. 7 days left her 1 day uncovered. 1 day was not safety. It was arithmetic. "What do you want in exchange?" I stand where trouble can see me. That all? That is usually enough. She closed the ledger halfway. You will sleep in the dry room off the kitchen. You will not come into this office unless I invite you. You will not speak for me, for the Iron Laurel, or for anything that has my name on it. If a man asks why you're here, you are waiting out weather. If Boone Shackle returns, you do what you did tonight and nothing more. Rafe listened as if terms deserved respect even when they came from a woman the town had not learned to respect yet. Agreed. Ruth will show you the cot. He stood at the door. He paused. Hale was not trying to scare you into paying a debt. Esther looked up. No, she said. He was trying to scare me into admitting the debt existed. Rafe nodded once. Recognition, not approval. Then he left. Esther worked until the town went black outside her window. She built the argument the way Eli used to build shelves. Measure first, cut once, trust weight only after testing it. By 2 in the morning, the shape of Hale's lie was visible. The forged lien did not exist alone. It leaned against something else. She had marked Hale's confirmed property in red ink on her wall map. Boarding houses, a livery yard, 2 warehouses, 3 empty lots near the arroyo. In blue, she had marked properties he was trying to acquire. In black, the new rail survey that had been filed by the Mesa Verde and Northern Company. The black line cut through the north edge of Juniper Bend like a knife through bread, and it passed directly behind the Iron Laurel. Not across the main room, not across the bar, across the yard where the well stood. The well was the whole reason Eli had bought the lot. In dry country, a building was wood and nails. A well was power. A shadow crossed the doorway. Rafe stood there with 2 tin cups. He did not ask whether she was awake. The lamp answered that. He set 1 cup on the edge of the desk, far from the papers. The rail company filed water right options last month, he said. Esther stopped writing. Where? Territorial office in Santa Fe first. County filings trail by 60 to 90 days when water or right-of-way is involved. She looked at him then. That was not saloon talk. That was courthouse talk, marshal talk, or fugitive talk. The kind of knowledge carried by men who had spent years learning which papers could destroy a person and which rooms held them. The county register showed nothing. It wouldn't yet. She wrote the phrase carefully. Santa Fe Territorial water right options. Filing lag. Check Hale under corporate nominee. Corporate nominee, she said. Hale won't use his own name if the option is dirty. What name would he use? Rafe lifted his coffee. Ask for all instruments connected to LH Holdings, Black Mesa Development, and any assignment naming the Iron Laurel well lot. Esther wrote those down too. She did not thank him. Not because she was ungrateful. Because gratitude was too soft for what the information had done. It had moved the wall. The next morning, Jesse Danner came through the kitchen door at first light with mud on his cuffs and a certified copy folded inside his coat. He was 21, narrow-shouldered, restless, and more loyal than he wanted anyone to notice. His mother Ruth had cooked for the Iron Laurel since the first winter, and Jesse had been carrying Esther's letters since he was old enough to sit a saddle without falling off. Man at the land office said it was sitting in the wrong packet, Jesse said. He said it had been filed under Black Mesa Development. Esther unfolded the copy at the kitchen table. There it was. A water right and access option filed 38 days earlier with the Territorial office. Grantor, Black Mesa Development Company. Authorized agent, Lucian Hale. Property description, rear yard, well access, and service alley of the Iron Laurel Saloon, Juniper Bend, Territory of New Mexico. Consideration paid by Mesa Verde and Northern Railway, $4,700. Hale had sold access to a well he did not own. To make the sale work, he needed the Iron Laurel cleared from Esther's hands before the county register caught up. He was not collecting old money. He was burying a new crime. Ruth Danner had been standing at the stove with her back turned. she said. "If you're looking for old paper, there is one place you haven't looked." Esther turned. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron, crossed to the flour bins, and pulled the second bin away from the wall with a grunt. Behind it, a loose brick sat in the chimney base. Ruth worked it free. Inside the gap was a flat tin case dark with soot. "Ely gave me that 6 days before he died," Ruth said. "Told me if a man ever came with paper trying to push you out, I was to wait until you asked the question that mattered." Esther did not move for a moment. What was the question? Who owned the place before he died? The tin opened with a dry click. Inside was a narrow founding register, older than the working ledger, its cover warped from years of heat. Esther knew Eli's handwriting before she saw the words. Iron Laurel Founding Register. October 1880. Page 1, cash investment. Page 2, license fee. Page 3, co-founders. Eli Marrin and Esther Bell Marrin, born Whitcomb. Equal share, equal liability, equal title. Esther sat down because the room had changed beneath her. For 3 years, Juniper Bend had treated her as a widow, holding on to her husband's business until a man with enough money found the proper lever. But Eli had written the truth in ink when the doors first opened. She had not inherited the Iron Laurel. She had built it. And no debt against Eli alone could remove a co-founder who had never signed away her share. Ruth said nothing. Jessie said nothing. Rafe stood at the kitchen door, looking not at Esther's face but at the register in her hands. He understood what paper meant when it came alive. Esther closed the book. "Jess," she said, "saddle the gray. You are taking 3 letters. Where?" "1 to the county clerk, 1 to Santa Fe, 1 to Judge Kittredge." Jessie was already moving. Esther went to the office and looked out the window. Boone Shackle stood across the street beneath the barber's awning, toothpick in his mouth, eyes on the Iron Laurel's rear hall. He was not hiding. That was the message. "We see the room you work in. We know when the lamp is lit. We know you are alone." Esther stood in the window until Boone saw that she had seen him. She did not lower the curtain. She did not step back. After half a minute, Boone shifted his weight. After 1 minute, he looked away first. Then Esther turned from the window and held out the founding register to Rafe. "I need him outside while I make copies." Rafe took in the book, her hands, the window, the street. "Only outside?" "Only outside." He put on his hat and walked to the Iron Laurel's front doorway. He did not draw. He did not pose. He stood with his coat open and his right hand resting near his holster, as ordinary as a closed gate. Boone watched him from across the street. Then Boone was not there anymore. For 3 days, Esther turned paper into consequence. She copied the founding register by hand 3 times. She sent Jessie to the county archive to pull every seal notice from 1877 to 1882. She wrote Santa Fe requesting all filings connected to Hale, Black Mesa Development, and the Iron Laurel well lot. She wrote Judge Kittredge with a summary so clean that even a tired judge on Circuit Road would know the problem before he stepped off the coach. At night, Rafe stayed in the dry room. By day, he sat near the back door and played solitaire. He rarely finished. He spoke little. But when he did, it mattered. "The local telegraph reports to Sheriff Brawley," he said on the second morning. Esther looked up. "How do you know?" "Because Brawley reads what he is paid to read. By Hale, by whoever pays first." So she sent Jessie 2 towns east to wire the Mesa Verde and Northern Land agent directly. On the 3rd afternoon, the reply came back. The railway held an executed water right option signed by Lucien Hale as controlling agent for the Iron Laurel property. They would provide a copy upon judicial request. Esther pinned the telegram beside the map. Every piece now pointed the same direction. Forged lien, false debt, fraudulent well option, co-founder title. All she needed was time. Lucien Hale returned that evening with the sheriff. Sheriff Amos Brawley was a soft-faced man with hard habits. He had kept his badge for 7 years by discovering that the law had many doors, and rich men usually knew which one they wanted opened. He did not look proud when he came into the Iron Laurel. That did not make him clean. Hale placed a civil possession order on the bar. 24 hours, he said. The sheriff has recognized the debt. The saloon was full. It always seemed to be full when men came to take things. Esther picked up the order and read it. The language was neat. Too neat for Brawley. Hale's lawyer had drafted it and put the sheriff's name where courage should have been. Rafe stepped into the back hall but did not enter the room. Esther heard him. She did not look. "Mr. Hale," she said. "The lien named in this order does not appear in the county instrument index. I have written confirmation from the clerk." Brawley blinked. Hale's jaw hardened. "The territory has wide tolerance for incomplete rural records," Hale said. "The lien also carries a county seal that did not exist until 3 years after the date on the document." A freighter near the stove took his hat off slowly, as if the air had changed. Esther set the order back on the bar. "And the debt is against Eli Marrin alone. The founding register names me co-owner from the first day the Iron Laurel opened." Hale's eyes sharpened. There it was. He had not known about the register. "The original can be produced," Esther said. "Copies have already been made. If you file this order, Judge Kittredge will see the sheriff of this county enforced a claim built on a false seal and a non-existent lien." She looked at Brawley. "That question will not stop with him." Brawley looked at the order, then at Hale, then at the floor. It is a strange thing to watch a practical man discover that practicality now points in the opposite direction. Hale picked up the order. "This is not finished." "No," Esther said. "It is finally in writing." He left. Brawley followed, and this time, when the door closed, a few men in the room found reasons to look ashamed. Esther reached under the bar for a clean sheet and wrote down every word she remembered. Time, date, witnesses, tone, position of each man. She had learned the first rule of survival in paper wars. Memory is only useful until someone asks for proof. That night, Danger stopped being polite. Esther woke at her desk with ink drying on the tip of her pen. Another impact came from the kitchen passage. Not a crash. A body striking wood and trying not to make noise. She grabbed the lamp and crossed the hall. The dry room door was half open. Inside, Rafe had Boone's shackle pressed against the flower shelves with one forearm under Boone's jaw. A broken lantern lay on the floor, still smoking. A black scorch climbed the wall where the flame had caught and been smothered. Boone's right hand hung uselessly at his side. Rafe's left cheek was split open. Neither man was breathing hard. That made it worse. "He came through the coal hatch," Rafe said. Esther looked at Boone. "You brought fire into my building." Boone said nothing. Men like Boone needed permission to speak. Hale was not there to grant it. "Walk out the front door," Esther said. "Tell Hale the register has copies. The well option has a telegram, and the judge has been notified. Tell him burning this place now would only prove what the documents already suggest." Boone looked at Rafe. Rafe loosened his arm by 1 inch. "Go," Esther said. Boone went, slowly, with one hand against his ribs and no dignity left to carry. Esther wet a cloth and handed it to Rafe. "Your face." He pressed the cloth to the cut. "He'll try for the book." "I know. Move it tonight." "I already did." The original register was not in the office drawer. It was under Ruth's mattress, inside the ticking, wrapped in oilcloth. 3 copies were in separate places. One with Jesse. One inside the hollow bar rail Eli had built the winter before he died. One folded beneath the lining of Esther's own trunk. Rafe's gaze shifted just enough for her to know he approved. "You expected the coal hatch?" "I expected Hale to find a door he did not need to knock on." Still, the next morning, the original was gone. Ruth found the cut in her mattress at 6. The oilcloth had been pulled out, the register taken. Esther stood over the slit ticking and let fear enter her body. One breath, too. Then she made it leave. Rafe came in from the kitchen with a folded packet. I had Jesse take photographic plates of the 3 key pages yesterday, he said. Esther stared at him. The packet held dark, imperfect paper prints from the daguerreotype man who worked above the mercantile. The words were legible. Eli Marrin, Esther Bell Marrin. Equal share, equal title. Her throat tightened in a way Boone's hand had not managed. You did not tell me you were sleeping. I would have argued. Yes. She looked at the photographs again. Rafe had not saved her. That was too simple, and she disliked simple stories when they were false. He had preserved the proof while she was preserving everything else. There was a difference. It mattered. Judge Kittredge arrives tomorrow, she said. Jesse should meet him before Hale does. I was about to say that. I know. Judge Solomon Kittredge arrived on the noon coach, in a gray coat dusted white from the road, and with the face of a man who had heard lies told by every class of person, and found them equally tiresome. Jesse was waiting at the station with Esther's petition sealed in wax. The judge read the first page standing beside the coach. He read the second page before the driver had finished unloading trunks. Then he told Jesse, 2 o'clock, courthouse. Both parties. The courthouse in Juniper Bend was one large room, 2 narrow windows, a clerk's table, and a raised bench that made the judge look taller than he was. Esther had always liked that about courtrooms. The height was not grandeur. It was sight. A judge had to see the whole room. Hale arrived at 157 with an attorney named Warren Pike, who wore a polished collar and carried enough paper to make weakness look substantial. Rafe did not come inside. Esther had not asked him to. This fight had to be hers in the record. Not because she refused help. Because records had to name the right person doing the right thing. She placed her documents in order. First, the Saloon license. Then the founding register photographs. Then Ruth's sworn statement. Then the false lien. Then the county seal notice from 1881. Then the county clerk's written confirmation that the lien number did not exist. Then the territorial water right option. Then the railway telegram. Last, the civil possession order Hale had tried to use. A row of facts, a loaded gun made of paper. Kittredge entered it too exactly. Mrs. Marrin, he said, you filed the petition. Proceed. Esther stood. Her knees did not feel weak. That surprised her less than it should have. She began with the Iron Laurel's creation. October 4, 1880, license granted. October 10, liquor tax paid. October 16, first freight shipment received. She presented the photographic pages showing her name beside Eli's. She explained Ruth's handling of the original, the theft of it, and the copies made before that theft. Warren Pike rose. Your Honor. The petitioner asks the court to accept photographs of a missing book. Kittredge looked over his spectacles. Counselor, the book appears to be missing because someone stole it after these proceedings began. I am listening closely to whether your client intends to help locate it. Pike sat down. Esther moved to the lien. She placed Hale's paper beside a 1879 warehouse mortgage bearing the old Oval County seal, then beside the public notice adopting the square seal in 1881. The lien was dated 1878. It bore the square seal. She did not over-explain. A forged document sometimes looked strongest when silence stood beside it. Kittredge picked both papers up. He held them to the window light. Continue. She showed the missing serial number. The freight contradiction. The fact that Eli was documented in Kansas on the day Hale's paper claimed he signed in Juniper Bend. Then she moved to the water right option. 38 days before Hale had demanded her signature, Black Mesa Development had sold railway access to the Iron Laurel's well for $4,700. Hale had signed as controlling agent. He had not controlled the lot. He had never controlled the well. He had sold what he intended to steal later. The room was quiet when she said it. Even Warren Pike paused before standing. His argument was smooth. He spoke of incomplete frontier records, of customary debt assumption, of practical title, of widows acting as informal operators, while male ownership remained the legal presumption. He spoke for 12 minutes. He never explained the seal. He never explained the missing number. He never explained the railway money. Kittredge asked him directly, "How does a lien dated 1878 bear a seal adopted in 1881? Pike said, "County offices in remote territories often maintained overlapping instruments." That was not my question. Pike adjusted his cuff. "I cannot speak to the clerk's equipment, Your Honor." "Then do not ask me to ignore it." Kittredge reviewed the documents for 21 minutes. No one moved much. Outside the window, a wagon passed. A horse shook its harness. Somewhere down the street, a woman laughed and then stopped when she realized the courthouse had gone silent. Finally, the judge set down Hale's lien. "The court finds material doubt as to the authenticity of the alleged freight lien, including but not limited to the non-existent registry number, the impossible seal date, and the chronological inconsistency between the alleged debt and the establishment of the business." He made a note. "The possession order based on that lien is void." Another note. The court further recognizes the petitioner, Esther Marrin, as co-founder and co-owner of the Iron Laurel Saloon from October 1880, with standing independent of her late husband. He turned a page. The court also finds that the territorial water right option executed by Lucian Hale through Black Mesa Development warrants referral to the territorial attorney for investigation of fraudulent conveyance. Kittredge closed the file. "Mr. Hale, I strongly recommend you stop creating documents." That was the sentence Juniper Bend remembered. Not because it was loud, because it was clean. Hale left first. His attorney spoke to him for less than a minute outside, then walked to the coach office and bought passage out. That told Esther more than any confession would have. Rafe was across the street under the feed store awning. He had stayed outside with a view of the courthouse door and both alleys. Esther walked to him. "It's done," she said. Something in his face changed by the width of a matchstick. "Done enough? The lien is void. My ownership is entered. The water right option goes to the territorial attorney. And Hale, he still has money. Money buys delay, yes. But not silence. Not anymore." Rafe nodded. The wind moved dust along the street. For the first time in a week, Esther felt how tired she was. Not weak, tired. There is dignity in admitting the difference. "Your 7 days end tomorrow," she said. "They do. I will not ask where you were headed. South. Are you still?" He looked past her toward the Iron Laurel. The front windows were catching late sun. Ruth had already lit the kitchen lamp. Jesse was standing on the porch telling 3 people the story too quickly and using his hands too much. Rafe's eyes returned to Esther. "Not unless you want me gone." That was not the answer she expected. Or perhaps it was, and she had been waiting to see if the evidence supported it. "I do not need a man to stand in my doorway," she said. "I know. I do need someone who can read a filing, spot a false name, and keep Jesse from trusting the local telegraph. I can do those, and someone who understands that the office door is closed unless invited. I can do that too." She looked at him with the steadiness she used for ledgers and courtrooms and men who thought intimidation was argument. "Then stay because you choose to, not because trouble might." Rafe's answer took time. She liked that. Quick answers were often borrowed from habit. "Yes," he said, "I choose to." Esther nodded. That was enough for the street. Ruth made venison stew. "Then I choose quickly." For the first time all week, Esther almost smiled. 3 weeks later, the new sign went up. The Iron Laurel, the same name, the same dark green lettering Eli had ordered from a sign painter in Santa Fe. But beneath it, in smaller gold letters, the new line read, "Esther Marrin, Proprietor." She stood on the boardwalk after the painter left and looked at it until the words stopped feeling strange. Rafe stood in the doorway behind her. "It is accurate," she said. "It is, that was all. Some truths do not need ceremony. They need to be visible from the road." The Iron Laurel changed after that, though not in the way people expected. The whiskey did not improve. It had already been fair. The stew did not improve. Ruth would have taken offense at the suggestion that it needed improvement. The accounts were still clean. The rooms upstairs still plain. The well still cold and deep. What changed was where people came when paper started to feel dangerous. A seamstress came first, carrying a lease with an amendment written in a different ink. Then a mule skinner with a wage receipt that did not match his pay. Then a widow from Cerro Crossing, whose brother-in-law had discovered a deed he claimed made him generous for letting her remain in her own house. Esther read what they brought. Rafe found the statute when the matter required one. Jesse carried letters to offices where clerks preferred not to answer women. Ruth poured coffee for anyone who looked as if they might collapse before the truth had been organized. On a Thursday morning in late spring, a woman in a gray travel coat stood inside the Iron Laurel's front door with a folded contract held against her chest. She looked around the room the way frightened people look around rooms, not for comfort, for exits. Esther came around the bar and pulled out a chair. "Sit," she said. "Show me what they gave you." The woman sat. Her hand trembled only once when she placed the contract on the table. Esther read the first page, then the second. By the third, she saw it. A renewal clause that looked optional and functioned like a trap. A default term changed after signing. A landlord's approval requirement buried where an honest document would not hide it. "When is payment due?" Esther asked. 9 days. Do you have your first copy?" The woman looked up. "I kept it." "Good." That one word changed the woman's face. Not into relief, not yet. Into the expression of someone who had been alone with a problem and had just heard another person name the door out. Esther pulled a clean sheet from under the bar. "This is what you file. This is who receives it. This is what the landlord will say first. And this is why it does not mean what he wants you to think it means." Rafe stood near the office doorway, listening without intruding. When Esther reached the territorial filing question, he said, "Joint tenancy petitions can go through Santa Fe if the amended clause affects title rights. There was an 1881 decision out of Tucson." Esther looked over. "You read Tucson decisions? When they're useful. Was it useful?" "It is now." The woman at the table looked between them. "Why would you help me?" Esther did not answer at once. She thought of Boone's hand at her throat, of Hale's paper torn into 4 pieces, of Eli's hidden register, of a judge holding a false seal to the light, of her own name in gold paint where anyone on Main Street could see it, and of the simple, hard lesson that had saved the Iron Laurel. "The paper is never just paper," she said. "It is what someone hopes you will not read." Then she began writing. That evening, after the chairs were turned up and Ruth had shut the kitchen, Esther sat at the bar balancing the day's accounts. The building was quiet in the way a useful place becomes quiet after being full. Not empty, exactly, but settled. The repaired floorboards near the dry room still smelled faintly of new pine. The front door was latched against a cool wind. A lamp burned low over the bar. Rafe came in from the back with the water log in his hand. "The well level held," he said. "Rail crew drew from the public tank instead." "Good." He placed the log beside the ledger, not on top of it, beside it. Small courtesies become large when a person has lived among men who take space without seeing what they touch. Esther closed the account book. "The woman today will need 2 filings. 3, Rafe said. If the amendment changed after signing, she should notify the notary who witnessed the original." Esther looked at him. "You have become inconveniently useful." I have been worse things. He said it without self-pity. That mattered too. She came around the bar and stopped a few feet from him. There was enough room between them for retreat. He always left that much. I have been reading the record, she said. Rafe did not move. The one that is not in the county office. His eyes stayed on hers. It says? It says you came here because trouble was visible and stayed after it was not. It says you know when to speak and when not to. It says you have had many chances to take control of a room and have mostly chosen to make room instead. She paused. I trust records more than feelings. Feelings can be weather. Records are what remain after weather passes. Rafe's voice was low. And what does the record show? Esther looked around the Iron Laurel, the shelves Eli had built, the bar she had kept polished through 3 years of doubt, the office door that no longer stayed locked because fear was no longer the shape of her work. Then she looked back at Rafe. It shows enough for me to act on. He took one step, only one. The rest was hers. She did not step back. By summer, Hale was gone from Juniper Bend. The Territorial attorney's inquiry had reached 2 of his companies and 1 bank that suddenly found his account history less charming than before. The railway suspended its option. The county clerk, under Judge Kittredge's written attention, discovered a new respect for proper indexes. Boone Shackle left sooner. Men who sell their strength by the hour do not stay where the purchaser's credit has failed. Esther did not buy Hale's properties when they came cheap. People were surprised by that. They should not have been. She had not fought to become Hale in a cleaner dress. She had fought to keep what she built. The Iron Laurel was enough. On a bright morning in June, Esther stood behind the bar as the room filled the way rooms fill when they have earned trust. Slowly at first, then all at once. Ruth's coffee was ready. Jesse opened the register. A rancher paid a debt without being asked twice. At the back table, Rafe dealt solitaire and lost with impressive calm. A stranger came in dusty from the North Road, looked around, and measured the room with the caution of a man used to disappointment. Esther set a cup on the bar. Coffee is hot, she said. Sit wherever you like. He did. After the first sip, his shoulders lowered. Just a little. Enough. The Iron Laurel was loud and warm and solvent. Its well was still its own. Its records were clean. Its name hung where the street could read it. And under that name, in gold paint that held the morning light, was the line Lucian Hale had tried very hard to keep out of every record that mattered. Esther Marrin, proprietor. The paper was never just paper. It was proof of who had been here all along.